When humanity first entered the galactic stage, no one cared. They were just another species, not particularly strong, not particularly advanced, and certainly not worthy of fear. At best, the Galactic Concord considered them a curious anomaly. At worst, they were a mild inconvenience. And for a while that was fine. Until the first planetary collapse. Until the first plague outbreak. Until the first unwinnable war. Because when everything fell apart, the galaxy discovered something terrifying. Humans didn't run. They didn't surrender. They just fixed things, and people started noticing. The falling star empire was dying. For centuries, their homeworld's atmosphere had been failing. Every attempt to repair it had ended in failure. They had pleaded for help from the Galactic Concord, but the other great civilizations saw no value in them. Their planet was a lost cause. And then, the humans arrived. They took one look at the problem, shrugged, and said, "Yeah, we can fix that." And within a decade, they rebuilt an entire planetary ecosystem. They restored the atmosphere. They replenished the oceans. They engineered entire forests back to life. And for the first time in generations, the falling star people saw a blue sky. They fell to their knees in worship. Not because the humans had demanded it, not because of divine intervention, but because to them, it was a miracle. And that was just the beginning. The Ulari Dominion was doomed. A mysterious virus had swept through their densely populated core worlds. It was unstoppable. Quarantines failed. Antiviral treatments did nothing. Entire cities collapsed into chaos. The Galactic Concord advised them to prepare for extinction. And then, a human research vessel entered their system. They didn't ask for permission. They just started working. Within months, the virus was contained. Within a year, the Ulari had a cure. And when the first healthy Ulari child was born, the entire species fell into religious devotion. They renamed their capital city. They dedicated monuments. They rewrote their holy texts. And suddenly, the Ulari had a new pantheon. At its center, humanity. By the time the third civilization started worshipping humans, the Galactic Concord panicked. It wasn't just that humans were helping. It wasn't just that humans were winning battles and curing diseases. It was that entire populations were converting. Religious leaders abandoned old gods. Political figures swore allegiance to human ideals. And worst of all, some of the Concord's own citizens started questioning their own governments. Because while their leaders argued and debated, the humans had already fixed the problem. And that was something no empire could compete with. The Galactic Concord had seen wars, rebellions, and ideological shifts. But never had they seen an entire civilization abandon their rulers in favor of an outside species. At first, the galactic leaders tried to downplay it. It's just a small cult. It's a phase. It will die out eventually. But it didn't. Because humanity wasn't forcing anyone to follow them. They just kept fixing things. And that was a problem. The Tal Rho conflict was supposed to be a lost cause. A minor border skirmish had turned into a full-scale planetary siege. The native Ravok people were outnumbered, starving, and abandoned by the Concord. Their leaders had already surrendered. Their people were preparing for extermination. And then, the humans arrived. Not a military fleet, not elite mercenaries, just a handful of engineers, doctors, and veterans. They dropped supplies. They dug trenches. They taught farmers how to turn waste into food. They repaired old, broken weapons. And somehow, the Ravok held the line. And when the invaders finally retreated in defeat, the Ravok renamed their planet. They called it New Terra. They worshipped humanity as protectors. Not because they had conquered. Not because they had demanded loyalty. But because humans had stood with them when their own government had left them to die. By now, entire civilizations were abandoning their leaders. Faiths collapsed overnight. Political factions dissolved. Entire colonies rejected their old rulers and instead asked for Terran guidance. The Galactic Concord met in emergency session. "What do we do?" a Zilari diplomat hissed. "We cannot compete with their—" He gestured wildly. "Whatever this is." A Threxan warlord snarled, his scales twitching. "They aren't even trying to rule," he snapped. "They just show up, fix everything, and suddenly half the population starts praying to them." The room fell silent. Because that was the real fear, wasn't it? Humans weren't conquering. They weren't demanding loyalty. They were simply better at governing than the actual rulers. And people noticed. Because when the choice was between corrupt politicians arguing in committees or a human team that just arrived and solved everything in a week, the answer was obvious. And that made humanity the greatest threat the galaxy had ever seen. In a desperate attempt to regain control, the Concord issued a galactic-wide order. No civilization could accept human aid without direct Concord approval. The official reason? To prevent cultural contamination. The real reason? To stop people from worshipping humans. But it was too late, because the people had already chosen, and nothing the Concord did could change that. 3 weeks later, the first major rebellion began. Not against humanity, against the Concord itself. Entire worlds refused to follow the anti-human decree. When the Concord tried to block human aid, planets seceded. When the Concord demonized humans, their own citizens defended them. And for the first time in thousands of years, the Concord realized they were losing control, not to war, not to invasion, but to something far worse. Hope. Hope that things could be better. Hope that problems could be fixed. Hope that someone actually cared. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. The Galactic Concord's power was crumbling, not because of war, not because of economic collapse, but because people had hope, and hope was dangerous. Because once people realized the galaxy could be better, they demanded it. And the humans? They just kept proving it was possible. The first rebellion was small. A single colony refused to follow the anti-human decree. They welcomed human engineers, doctors, and volunteers despite the Concord's orders. The Concord threatened sanctions. The colony ignored them. And then, other planets started following their example. At first, it was just a few, then dozens, then entire star systems. The Concord sent enforcement fleets. But something terrifying happened. Instead of fighting, the rebels broadcast their demands to the entire galaxy. "We are not under attack. We are not being invaded. We are simply refusing to obey a government that abandoned us." It was devastating. The Concord couldn't claim it was defending against an aggressor, because the people weren't fighting a war. They were just walking away, and nobody could stop them. The highest leaders of the Galactic Concord met in secret. The atmosphere was tense. "Do you not see?" a Zilari admiral hissed, his scales flaring. "We are losing control." A Zirak minister slammed a datapad onto the table. It displayed a live feed of a rebellion world. Human volunteers were rebuilding entire cities. No coercion, no military presence. Just humans doing what they always did, fixing things. And the local population? They weren't just grateful. They were loyal, not to their old governments, not to the Concord, to humanity. A Threxan warlord leaned forward, his voice grim. "This is how we fall," he murmured. The room fell silent, because they knew he was right. This wasn't a war. There were no armies to defeat. This was a shift, and it was unstoppable. The Concord issued its most drastic decree yet. Humanity was to be completely isolated. No human ships could enter conquered space. No civilization could accept human aid. Any planet found harboring humans would be sanctioned, or worse. It was a terrifying statement. a final attempt to break the movement. And for a moment, the galaxy held its breath. Would people fall in line? Would they abandon the humans? Or would they choose differently? And then, a message from the rebellion world spread across every major system. A simple, short transmission. We do not follow gods. We do not follow rulers. We follow those who build. It was the death knell of the Concord's power, and the moment they realized, humanity had already won. The Galactic Concord's decree was supposed to crush the movement. Instead, it accelerated it. Planets that had remained neutral suddenly had to choose. Would they obey the Concord, the same government that had ignored their suffering for centuries? Or would they side with the humans, who had arrived and, in a matter of years, fixed what their leaders never could? One by one, worlds made their choice. And for the first time in history, the Galactic Concord wasn't feared. It was ignored. The planet Solva Prime was a key member of the Concord. Its leaders were loyal, its military was strong, its economy was vital. And yet, when the anti-human decree was announced, the people revolted, not with violence, not with protests, but with a single declaration. If humanity is outlawed, then so are we. And overnight, an entire planet left the Concord. The defection of Solva Prime set off a chain reaction. Other planets saw what they had done, and followed. Kithros 7 announced that it would continue trade with human colonies, despite the blockade. The Orlith Confederacy officially recognized Terran engineers as honorary citizens. The Ravok clans, once neutral, declared that any attempt to restrict human movement would be considered an act of war. And suddenly, the Galactic Concord had a new problem. Not only were they losing control, they were losing members. And the humans? They weren't asking for any of this. They had no interest in ruling. But that only made them more terrifying. Because humanity's power didn't come from conquest. It came from competence. And the more the Concord tried to suppress them, the stronger they became. Faced with mass defection, the Concord's remaining leaders panicked. A secret meeting was called. Every powerful faction still loyal to the Concord gathered. The debate was short and brutal. They only had one option left, one final act of desperation. If they couldn't win hearts and minds, then they would force compliance. And so, the Concord announced its final edict. The Humanity Containment Order. All human-controlled planets were to be placed under military quarantine. All non-human species found aiding humans would face corrective intervention. All diplomatic relations with Earth and its colonies were officially revoked. It was the most aggressive policy ever enacted. A clear message to the galaxy. The Concord would not allow humanity to rise. And then, the galaxy responded, and not in the way the Concord expected. The Humanity Containment Order was supposed to bring the galaxy back under control. It was meant to end the rebellion, to force planets into submission, to cut off humanity's growing influence. Instead, it destroyed the Galactic Concord. The Concord expected fear. They expected planets to fall in line. What they did not expect was open defiance. When the first Concord fleet arrived to blockade a rebel system, the planetary governor didn't resist. He didn't call for battle. Instead, he broadcast a message to the entire galaxy, a live transmission, and his words shattered the illusion of conquered power. If the Concord cared about us, they would have helped us long ago. But when our children starved, they ignored us. When our cities crumbled, they debated policies. And when our people suffered, they turned their backs. The governor's voice was steady, but behind him the people stood. Not soldiers, not revolutionaries, just ordinary citizens, waiting, watching, listening. The only ones who came to help us were the humans. And for that you call them a threat? If helping the helpless is illegal, then maybe it's not the humans who are the problem. The message was broadcast to every major system, and in that moment, the Concorde lost. Because billions of citizens, even those who had once been loyal, realized the truth. The Concorde didn't serve them. It only served itself. And once that illusion broke, there was no putting it back together. Planets stopped obeying orders. Military fleets refused to fire. Entire civilizations walked away. One by one, the Concorde's allies vanished. Some declared independence. Some joined the rebellion. Some simply ignored the Concorde altogether. And suddenly, the rulers of the galaxy found themselves ruling nothing at all. The Galactic Concorde, once the ultimate authority in known space, ceased to exist. With the Concorde gone, the galaxy faced an uncertain future. And so, naturally, they turned to humanity. Because surely the species that had overthrown the old order would take its place. Surely the humans would rule. But they didn't. They refused. They simply went back to what they had always done. Helping. Building. Fixing. And the galaxy? It was left with a choice. To fall into chaos, or to build something better. Not because a ruler commanded them, not because a conqueror demanded it, but because they had seen what was possible. And once you've seen a better world, you don't settle for less. That was humanity's true power. Not conquest, not control, not force, but hope. And in the end, that was what truly changed the galaxy forever.